I'm Bill Crum for News OK and the Oklahoman. I'm with James Pepper Henry, who is the new executive director of the Native American Cultural Center and Museum here in Oklahoma City. It's been in the works for 2 decades now. We're right on the cusp of moving into the phase where construction will be finished, and the museum is expected to open within about 3 years. James has just been hired as the executive director of the museum and the chief executive of the Museum Foundation, and takes over. His first day is June 19th.
Yes.
James has deep roots in Oklahoma. Tell us a little bit about your family. Tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, about your professional history as well. You've been in a lot of really top-notch places.
Well, thanks for having me, and I'm very excited to be coming aboard the American Indian Cultural Center Museum project, and it's been in the works for quite a while now, as you know, over a decade, and we're going to make it happen. It's going to open hopefully within the next 36 months or so. We're going to start construction again, starting hopefully this fall, so once all the pieces of the puzzle come together. But this is a great honor for me to be the director of this institution, a new institution, and I have deep roots here in Oklahoma. My family's been here for many generations. I'm a member of the Kaw Nation of Oklahoma, which is in Kay County, north central Oklahoma, and I'm also of Muskogee Creek heritage. I see the Cultural Center having 2 purposes. One is, again, to educate our citizens, but from a community perspective, it really will be an excellent venue for civic engagement among the 39 tribes, for us to share our heritages, our cultural lifeways with each other in a centralized location. The other mission that we have is an economic one, and people may have forgotten that originally the Cultural Center was established as a mechanism for tourism. Tourism is the 3rd largest industry in the state of Oklahoma, and cultural tourism is on the rise.
And that brings up the quality of the exhibits. You worked on the agreement when you were with the Museum of the Native American...
The National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C.
Right, in Washington, D.C. You worked on the agreement, which is a Smithsonian Institution affiliated museum.
Yes.
And you worked on the agreement there with the Native American Cultural Center here in Oklahoma City to share artifacts, exhibits, and so on and so forth.
Yes, this would have been back around 2006. The groundbreaking, I think, had just happened for the Cultural Center, and the Cultural Center, being a new institution, doesn't have a collection. And I think at some point it will become a collecting institution, but for now it will have to borrow collections from other institutions. And the Cultural Center is part of a larger American Indian Art Museum consortium that includes the National Museum of the American Indian. It also includes the Autry National Center in Los Angeles, California, the Heard Museum in Phoenix, Arizona, and the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis. And also Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Which is where you served for the past 2 years.
Yes, and so within that consortium, the Cultural Center will be borrowing some collections, primarily from the National Museum of the American Indian, objects that will represent the 39 tribes to help tell the histories of those tribes in the center, and this will be a long-term loan. And while I was at the Smithsonian, I was associate director at the National Museum of the American Indian, and worked with the Cultural Center to develop an agreement, actually a memorandum of agreement between the institutions to create an alliance and to be able to borrow some of those collections that are related to the 39 tribes here in Oklahoma.
Do you anticipate over time that there might be some reciprocity, and as this institution builds a collection, that artifacts and items from that could make their way to the museum in Washington, D.C. as well?
Sure, and I think even without having a collection, I think there's an opportunity to develop exhibitions with the National Museum of the American Indian as well as the other members of the consortium, and to be able to travel those exhibits within the consortium because they're very geographically diverse, spread out all over the country, and then to travel those beyond the consortium. So right now we've been talking about some ideas of exhibits that we'd like to produce together, but certainly at some point in time, not just objects from the historical period, meaning from post-contact when American Indians had contact with the first Europeans, and then through the 18th and 19th centuries up until the 20th century. We also have a mission to support and acknowledge contemporary Native artists. And so I see not only putting together exhibitions of historical material, but also contemporary art exhibitions, especially with our very talented Oklahoma Native American artists.
Well, you have deep roots in Oklahoma. You also have deep connections and roots in the museum business, for lack of a better term, I guess.
Sure.
Portland Art Museum, the Heard Museum, which is just a fantastic museum in Phoenix. Tell us a little bit about where you've been, how your career path has unfolded.
Sure. I worked for the Interstate Firehouse Cultural Center in North Portland, and also as the interim curator of American Indian art at the Portland Art Museum. And around that time, this would have been in the early 90s, my tribe, the Kaw Nation, located in Kaw City in Kay County, Oklahoma, asked if I would help them establish our tribal museum. And so that was a great honor for me to come back to Oklahoma to work for the Kaw Nation, and I helped establish our tribal museum. I was there for 4 years. And during that time, there was another Oklahoman, many of you may know, W. Richard West, or Rick West, who was on the board of the newly established National Museum of the American Indian. And Rick heard about me and recruited me to come work for the new National Museum of the American Indian. This is before it was even built on the National Mall.
Right.
I worked for the Smithsonian for 10 years. Started out in collections management and ended as an associate director before I went on to the Anchorage Museum in Anchorage, Alaska as their executive director.
And then you were director of the Heard Museum.
Yes,
in Phoenix.
I was in Anchorage and helped with a $110 million expansion of that facility, and then moved on to the Heard Museum, which is one of the great American Indian art museums in the country. And then the opportunity to come back to Oklahoma came up. A good friend of mine, Dr. Dwayne King, the former director of the Gilcrease Museum, let me know that there was an opening at Gilcrease. So it was a great honor to come back to Oklahoma and be the director of that institution.
Now you embark on a new, as you said, museum, opening basically from scratch. It's less than scratch right now. It still has quite a bit of construction to be done on the interior in
Sure.
order to be finished. What are the first steps that a director must take in order to get that museum up and running, get the operations going, and how can people get involved with you?
Well, first of all, the project's been in the planning for a long time, and there's been a very dedicated staff that stuck with this project through thick and thin for the last decade. So there has been a lot of planning already, not just for the construction of the facility, but for the exhibitions and for the operations of the facility to get to opening day. And so now, with my involvement, we're going to implement those plans. Some of them may need to be revised because it's been a while since the planning had taken place. But that's what I'll be doing when I start in June, is looking at what needs to change and setting out that timeline to get us to opening day and beyond. But there are a lot of things that need to happen now, aside from the construction. There are tweaks that may have to happen with the construction part of it, but we're also going to be focused on operations. And an institution this size, 160,000 square feet, it can't operate just on staff alone. We needed to build a great volunteer corps. And every great institution and every large institution like this one really needs to develop and have a volunteer corps to help operate the facility. And then, of course, we need to get the engine going in terms of administration. A museum cannot survive just on admission sales. We have to develop a strategy for what we call earned income, meaning that we need to get a gift shop up and running in the facility. We need to get a restaurant up and running, and then a facility, any great facility, the Oklahoma City Museum of Art or the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Center, they generate revenue by running the facility out for corporate events and for weddings and so forth. So that'll be part of this strategy as well to generate revenue for the facility is implementing a facility rental program. And then we also have to look on the contributed side, the contributed revenue side, looking at grants that we can apply for to help with funding programs and services at the museum. Of course, when we open, we want everybody in our area to come and then bring all their friends and family and invite their friends and family from around the country to come to the museum as well. But we also will be a venue to bring some of the great exhibits from around the country and around the world to the Cultural Center, specifically exhibitions that are focused on American Indian culture as well as cultures from other countries.
And those are all things that we anticipate will bring people to Oklahoma City basically from around the world.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Good.
We're very excited about that.
Again, I'm Bill Crum from News OK and the Oklahoman. We've been talking with James Pepper Henry, who will be the Executive Director of the Native American Cultural Center and Museum here in Oklahoma City. The museum probably will be open and up and running within the next 36 months. It's been a long journey, but as is, I think, being said among people who have been involved in it for a long time, the light is at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
And it's not a train.
And it's not the engine of the train coming at us.
Coming at us, right. Very good. Well, thanks very much, James. It is a pleasure to have you here today at the Oklahoman, and we look forward to the museum as it develops and opens to the public and the fantastic things that will come from that.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.